Hi there, welcome back to the studio. Let's jump right in. We're going to paint flowers again, of course. Today, though, I'm going to be using a slightly bigger canvas. It's a 24 by 30 inch canvas, which is a nice size. It's big, but not overwhelmingly big. So it's a good sort of size to build up to. We're going to do things a little bit differently. First of all, you can probably tell this canvas, it's been gessoed. There's some imperfections on it. That's because this is an old piece that I actually gessoed over and I'm going to paint over for this lesson. So there'll be a little bit, there's some hints of texture in here left over from the old piece. Not too much though, I didn't want too much. But just a little bit here and there, and that's totally fine. And if you have a canvas at home that you want to reuse, just throw some gesso over top of it and start painting. So I've gessoed it white, but we're actually going to color it. We're going to do some different techniques today. We're going to start by just covering this whole canvas with color. So let's get some of my old fave quinacridone magenta. I'm pouring it right onto the canvas. And of course I'm using the fluid acrylics again today. You can use a heavy bodied for this. There's no problem with that. They'll work just as well. This is just what I've got. So I just want to cover this whole canvas with some beautiful bright color. And I'm going to sort of move this all over. Look how bright that is. Let's get a little bit of quinacridone gold. I'm just going to pour it right onto my brush in this case. I could also just have poured it onto the canvas. And what else have I got here? Got a little bit of Payne's Gray. This is a little darker. We'll pour that down the edge there, maybe up in here. Nothing about this stage needs to look pretty. I mean, if you want to make it look pretty, by all means, go ahead. But really, I don't even know that we're going to see these colors in the end. Maybe we add a little bit of the gold to that color. If we paint over the magenta, it gives us purple. But we've got some more gold here. That's going to give us a nice green, which I feel like will be great to use. And in fact, I like that so much, I'm going to continue that green down to the bottom. So see, no real rhyme or reason. Maybe we'll get a little white on there. No real rhyme or reason. Just covering blotches of color. It can even get a little muddy. It's okay. You could even use a color you don't like for this stage. It really is just most important thing is just covering the canvas. You know, here we've got a little mud, that's okay. Covering the canvas in color. Just going to set that brush aside and get a clean brush. And a little bit more of the magenta. And maybe if we're in here, just add a bit more of that. Maybe a little more up there. Now of course magenta and green is going to look a little muddy, that's okay. Okay. I've covered this whole canvas. It's fun how, you know, when you're loose like that, how I actually kind of like the way this is looking in an odd way. All right. So now what we're going to do is actually let this piece dry. I'm going to sit it out and give it a few minutes to dry. I want it to dry completely, and then we'll come back in and move on to the next step. All right, so this piece is nice and dry now, and we're ready to move on. What I thought we'd do with this one is create a large vase of flowers. It's always fun to paint vases of flowers, so because I use different sort of colors throughout, that's going to sort of, for me, is going to help lead me into inspiration. And as I said earlier, I didn't plan as I was painting those colors. I just threw them on everywhere. But as you can see, I've got some bright areas and darker areas, and I can kind of use that in my mind for my placement of my vase. I've got this little piece of, it's just a chalk pastel. I'm using it just purely to give my brain an idea of marking. So you could use the same thing, or a China marker or something like that, to sketch yours out, or even a pencil. I just want to use this so that white, so that you'll be able to see it. So I like a vase off to the side. You know, you can center your vases, which is nice, but sometimes it's nice to sort of do it off to the side and then have the flowers kind of climbing out of it. So remembering our sort of rule of thirds, so if we were to, I'm doing this really loosely and I can tell already that I'm not even, but if we use our sort of rule of thirds, we're gonna want our vase to sort of land maybe in this realm. So that would give us like a focal point there, and then our flowers can have a focal point up coming in here. All right. So I'm just going to do it like that. So I'm just sketching out really roughly the vase. None of this is permanent. This is just giving my brain an idea of where to start, where to go. All right. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, is we'll have the vase off to the side here, and then our flowers can climb up towards the top of that corner of the canvas. And so I'm just going to grab my nice big house painting brush here, and I've got some white gesso on it. Again, as always, you can use a different color if you like, or you can use titanium white acrylic. Will give you the same effect. And I've sort of sketched out a vague line around, but mostly down here around the vase is where I'm looking. I'm just going to take my white, and I'm actually going to, I kind of like that I've got a bit of the hint of a table down here. So I'm letting it drip, I'm putting it on thick, nice and thick. And I'm going to come in, I can come in, and I know it seems a shame to cover up all of that paint. We are going to use a little bit of it though. So nice and thick with that paint, or the gesso, and maybe we'll and on this side, just going over my edges here. And see how already we're sort of getting, whoops, we dripped a little there. It's okay, it doesn't matter. All right. And I want to get a little extra thick in there. Okay, so again, this isn't looking like too much yet. Maybe that actually, let's come down a little bit there. So this doesn't have to be the definite shape, but we can kind of get the idea now of where those flowers are going to live on the canvas. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab, I have this little graphite pencil. It doesn't have to be graphite, it doesn't have to be a pencil. You can also use the back end of a paintbrush, a smaller paintbrush. What we're going to do is I actually really love to create, and this is why we painted the underneath. Actually, before I do this, I'm just going to add even a little bit more white over here. Really nice and thick paint. And then what we're going to do is carve in. So I'm just sort of drawing some leaf shapes. And you know what? I love the way these are looking, so let's get up in here a bit. Whoops. Watching these videos, you can probably tell I'm always covered in paint. It's always in my hair, it's on my clothes. So I'm just drawing really, like, I'm not trying to make these beautiful, perfect leaves at all, right? I'm just sort of the indication of leaves. And then I'll even add some lines to the outside. All right, and see, isn't that amazing? Like, lovely how it all sort of, you can see the variated color underneath. Variated, is that a word? But it's sort of orange in the line here, getting to the darker color. So it is worth having those different shades underneath, but as you can also see, you don't need them. All right, now let's add some flowers. Okay, so to get some flowers in there, I'm gonna grab another one of my little house painting brushes. I've got this guy here. It's just about an inch and a half. That's just the one I'm choosing. No particular rhyme or reason. I love this sort of deep purpley color here. It's really pretty. So I think that was sort of a fun mixture of, let's do some quinacridone magenta. And, whoops, a little quinacridone gold. And I'll just actually mix those two first, and then what if we add in, oh, and if we come over onto the white, look, it automatically gives us some of this sort of peachy orange color. Maybe we add a little over here, coming down our vase. There we go. And then what if it's that same pile of paint, or that same blob of paint on our palette, I'm just going to add the tiniest little drip of Payne's Gray. That got a little bit muddy, so I'm going to put a little bit more quinacridone magenta into it. And it gives us this sort of more muted tone. And kind of come down. All right, now I'm going to set this brush aside. And what other kinds of brush do we have here? I've got this lovely big round brush. I took a little bit of my quinacridone magenta, made a fresh spot of it on the palette. And then to it, let's add a little bit of the cerulean blue hue. And that's going to give us this nice dark purpley color. We can kind of come in, and we had some of that purple there. Oh, I'm dripping again. Just get some paper towel. I'm just going to wipe off some of that excess water. And now using this brush, we get some different marks. Maybe we've got some sort of blobby kind of guys. We got white mixing in now. We can come over to the side. Ooh, now with that white mixing in, it's turned this lovely sort of lavendery shade, or periwinkle, would you call that? Now that vase has got a little wider than I think I want it. So what if we came in and did some scribbles using just our little pencil again. Okay. Just going to take a step back. Yeah, I like where this is going. I think now is a good time to stop, let these layers dry. This paint is really thick, so it is going to take a little while for those thick layers to dry, but once they do, then we can come back in. We can tint our background if we want. This is still gesso. It's still got the ability to be painted over. We could create a pattern, and we can add in some more color and stuff to the background here. But I love where it's going so far. So let's take a step back, let it dry, and back in a few minutes. All right, so it's actually been overnight and this piece has had a lot of time to dry. So we can move on and not worry about any of these colors mixing with the colors we layer on top. As I looked at it, I thought we need some more. I'd really like to put, I'm loving these rich sort of jewel tones. I'd really love to hold on to that and add in, so I'm thinking a little bit more green right now, some sort of deep dark green, some olivey type greens. And then we're gonna shift the color in our vase here, but we'll keep some of the purpley shades and blue as well as we go. So let's just move along. I'm gonna grab one of my little filbert brushes here. This one says it's size 12, but really any size will work just fine. And then let's get some Payne's Gray. And some of our quinacridone gold. And then to that, and this might seem a little bit crazy, but I'm gonna add just the tiniest drop of cadmium red medium hue. Now normally you wouldn't want to mix your red and green, you know, mixing them all together, but what that's going to do is deepen the other two colors. So just a tiny drop, and that's going to give us this lovely dark green shade. And so what I'm going to do is I love these outlines of these leaves. I don't want to cover them up, but I do want to sort of highlight them. So I'm going to hold my brush way back at the end, and I'm holding it so that the flat part is touching the canvas. So I'm not going this way across the canvas. That would create a thick line. I want a thin line. So I'm gonna, and see, by holding it way back, I keep these sort of loose lines happening. Just gonna get a little bit more paint on my brush. You know, maybe over here, maybe we do it slightly thicker, the line. And then I'm thinking a little green down into this vase here. And still, I'm holding right at the back of my brush. That's keeping things nice and loose. It gives you a lack of control, which I know if you're not used to can be hard, but that's how you get those loose sort of painterly lines. If you're right up like this, it's fine, but it's going to give you a different type of effect, a different type of painting. And we're trying to keep things loose in this particular course. Of course, as always, paint the way you want to paint, but that's just my little tip for staying loose. Then maybe what we can do is, I'm just going to get a little bit, I've got my quinacridone gold, I'm going to add a little bit of that, more of that to the paint I have on my palette, which is going to give me a slightly lighter shade. See, just a little bit lighter, not much. Oops, maybe I'll just actually add, rather than adding it to my pile of paint, I'll go beside that pile, and that's gonna, there we go, that's more like what I was looking for. Slightly lighter. A little more of a yellow tone. Okay, after taking a little step back, I can see I'd like to narrow this vase just a little bit. I'm just going to do that by adding a little bit more white back around it. And maybe just add a little bit more white into some of these areas in the background. I kind of like the white background for this piece. There's sort of a stark contrast there that I'm just really enjoying. And then we'll start to brighten up some of these flowers and add in another layer. So to do this, I'm going to get my little 1-inch house painting brush and just get some of my white onto there. And I'm just going to come in this side. I feel like we could, and now this doesn't need to be perfect. My vase is not going to be clearly defined. It's going to be super loose. go, just adding in some little touches of white here and there. I kind of want to see some of my brush strokes in that background. I know it's hard to see on camera, but that's going to add some extra interest into the painting. When you see it up close or in person, you know, that's the kind of thing that makes an original painting look extra special sometimes, is those, oh, I'm dripping again. Those brush strokes, those little imperfections and textures that you see in an original piece. Yeah, that's a bit more like what I'm talking about. All right, and I think I'm gonna actually take this, let's add a little bit more white down into our, really lightly run a little white over here. Now see, my green is a little wet in there, so it's picking that up. I love that. I love the way that looks. And then now I've got a little bit of that sort of lighter green. I'm just gonna tap my brush into the green and yellow paint I had on my palette. And that's giving us a slightly lighter sort of green. We can kind of come up in here and create some just a little bit more of that sort of lighter, brighter background color there. Just gonna give another little bit of this down here. Because my brush is pretty dry, it's leaving these sort of lines in the paint, which is, I love it. It sort of gives just an extra cool bit of texture. Okay. Now let's get a little bit more sort of that deep dark purple in there. So to do that, I'm going to use some Payne's Gray and a little bit of my quinacridone magenta. Then I'm going to grab, use this little round brush here. And that's just going to give us this lovely purpley color, kind of like what we've already got in there, but it's just a shade or two, you know, just a hint darker. And I can kind of come in, just sort of drawing some sort of sketchy sort of circles. Maybe we darken a little bit in that center of that flower there. There we go. Okay, taking a step back, I think now would be a good time. Let's add in some deeper yellows. I'd like to do some stuff to brighten up this big flower here, which has sort of become like a focal point. Yeah, so I'm going to grab my big round brush and just take off some of the excess water. And let's get some of our quinacridone gold. And to that, I'm actually going to add a little bit of this color here, which is burnt sienna. It's sort of an orangey brown sort of shade, just a tiny bit of that. And that's going to give me this warm butterscotch color. I'm just going to come in here. Now see, it's transparent. We want to sort of make it a little more solid. So I'm just going to add a little bit of white to the mixture. There we go. And that's just going to, look at that, there we go. That brightens things up just a bit. And what we'll need to do is just sort of build this in layers. So I can still see some of that transparency underneath. That's okay. We'll build up the layers of that. Maybe a little bit more of that color up in there and over there. And then I love to just always do a little bit of a streak in my vase or down on my surface down here, just for fun, because why not? And then what if, there we go. Okay, I'm just gonna set that brush aside and we'll let that dry, and then I'll come back on and add another layer to sort of enhance those colors there. As I took a step back as well, I realized I had my flowers have sort of been climbing out of the vase here, which I like. I like for it to be sort of a wild and crazy bouquet. I know that realistically a flower that's way over there is probably going to droop. Its stem isn't going to be long enough. But I think now that I've kind of got a bit of a handle on my composition, I am going to take this bit of color out of there and maybe this part out up there. So I'm just going to grab, I've got one of my house painting brushes here. You can use the smaller one if you have yours. This one already had a little bit of white on it. And I'm just going to come in and just very sort of carefully, I mean not too carefully, it can be loose. I'm just going to sort of cover those areas that were looking a little off balance. And we can add in a little bit more white back over here. Maybe we'll come down in between and make that flower a little more of a circle there. And get my edge in, a little bit more paint on my edge. We can come around this purple flower and see how it's just sort of defining the bouquet a little bit. Now, while this area is still wet, what I'd like to do is come in, I've got this pencil, it's actually completely covered in paint, but it's still got a little tip to it. So you could use the back of a paintbrush or a pencil or something like that. And then I'm just going to come up and just sort of scribble some texture and shape. Just because I love those kinds of textures and fun in the background, and I really like it, especially with that white. Because I have the dark paint underneath, putting that little bit of textured scribbling in there, it shows the dark color underneath through the white, which is great. Okay, taking a little step back, now I can kind of see down here, we've got a little bit of darkness, it's a little bit muddled, we'll do some stuff in there. Like I said before, I'd like to brighten up this big flower here and sort of bring it out as a focal point. So to do that, I'm actually going to grab some of my cadmium red medium hue. And to that, I'm going to add a little bit of that burnt sienna. Then, I'll grab one of my little filbert brushes. And just make sure I take off any excess paint. This one is the size 12. It's just the one I happen to grab. And let's see how that, now that's quite bright, but let's see how that bright color so I'm just kind of circling around. And then maybe we do a little bit hint of that color down there. Maybe just some hints of it over here in this area and down in there. Whoops. Got a little happy there. I don't really want that red streak there quite so bold, so I'm just going to take my white and draw a new line there. No big deal. Okay, a little step back. Now see, look at that, how that really just makes that color pop there now. Up here now, this color, I like it still, but I'd like to do some stuff up there to brighten that, and I'd like to brighten this guy down here, maybe bring in more of a bluey purple flower. So, I'll grab another one of my little filbert brushes, and this was a purple mixture. I'm going to grab some quinacridone magenta. And oops. Just knocking things over here. To it, I'm going to add a little bit of cerulean blue hue. It's alright. For some reason, my eyes were glazing right over it, and I couldn't see it on my table here. Alright, so that mixture is going to create this really beautiful sort of cool blue purple shade, and let's just sort of drawing like a loose messy kind of circle there, and then we can do kind of the same thing maybe around that little yellow mark there. And then what we can do, I'm just going to rinse my brush. Actually, I'll just grab a fresh brush. I actually happen to have one here with some white on it. I'm now going to go over, because this is still wet, I'm going to go over more loose circles over and just sort of give that a little bit of white. Maybe we can add a little bit of that up here to this guy and a little hint of it up there. There we go. Okay, so this time as I step back, I started to look up here and see this flower here, and before I was kind of envisioning this being its own little flower right here, but what if this actually is a flower that's sort of facing up sort of that way? So in order to do that, let's get a little of our quinacridone magenta. And a fresh brush. I've actually got one here. It's got a little bit of white on it, and that's okay. But I'm just going to wipe off the excess water, excess paint. It's just a little filbert. And what if we kind of came up here and made sort of that C shape that we were doing before, maybe carried a little bit of a I don't like that circle shape that got created there, so I'm just going to touch that in with a little bit of white. Maybe grab a fresh brush with a little bit of touch of white on it, and we can really loosely add some highlights into there. There we go. And then I use the same brush, just get it nice and clean. Let's go back to our cadmium yellow medium hue with a little bit of white on our brush, just to give it some opaqueness. And then let's come in and do some sort of little center action there. And then I'll actually add a little bit more of that yellow. Maybe take a little bit of my quinacridone gold and add it to that yellow mixture to make it a little deeper. Oh, I got a little bit of blue on my brush. Just gonna wipe that off. So it's quinacridone gold, cadmium yellow, medium hue. and a touch of white. You can add just as drips can be. That's okay. Now actually we can use this same, I realize I haven't gone back to that other flower yet. Let's use this same mixture here. In there to brighten that flower. And then I'm just going to get a little bit of white on my brush and allow it to mix with that yellow and really brighten that flower up there. Now I noticed I dripped again. I'm really as drippy can be. Let's use this. There's a little bit of red got dripped in there. I actually wanted to enhance some of that green anyways. So I've got my yellow mixture here. I'm just going to take a tiny bit of my Payne's Gray, just the tiniest drop, and add it to that. It's going to give us a sort of soft green shade. I'm going to wipe away the excess there. I'm just going to come over that red there. And just fill in some bright greens in there. And then maybe we'll do the same thing over here. There we go. Okay, so I think we're almost done here. What I'm going to do is let this dry, and then we'll come back and add in some little white highlights throughout and just sort of really give it a little extra pizzazz. And yeah, and then I think this beautiful bouquet will be finished. Okay, so this is nice and dry now, and we can kind of just come in and add some extra little details. So I'm going to grab this small round brush. It's got a nice pointed tip. And I'm just going to take some white and let's do a little center just by making some dots inside the center of this big flower here. And we'll also add a few little sketchy highlights around that. So I'm just sort of very loosely doing some line work sort of around that center there. And we could do the same, something similar up here, maybe a few little dots in the center of this purple guy. And maybe this guy here. I think this flower over here could use a little bit of, maybe there's some white blossoms sort of around it. There we go, dripping again. Dripped in there, so I'm going to fix that. Oh, I have to fix. I got a little bit down there that I just realized I never fixed earlier. So I'm just going to take a clean brush, just using this little filbert guy because he's nice and clean. Take off the excess paint, and then I'll just come down in here and smooth away that bit of green we have happening there. And while I see that, I can actually come up and I'm just going to sort of square off that vase a little bit too. And then maybe, oops, that's a little brighter than I wanted. Just going to wipe some paper towel. Just some little highlights on our vase here. And where else? That little center of this little white guy would be nice, or this little purple guy. We could make him a little more of a white center there. And then maybe some more sort of white blossoms up there. All right, stepping back again to take a closer or a further look. When I stepped back, I did notice this flower is really standing out. I actually really like it. I like that it's a little smaller than the other flowers, but it's still pretty bold. But what I'd like to do is actually create another little one like that right there, just for some balance, and then maybe a little guy up there as well, just to sort of carry our eye throughout the piece. I also noticed that this flower here, I like that it's kind of loose, but it feels a little unfinished, but we can do that. We can sort of fix that with this purple here. So we mixed that purple by using some cerulean blue hue and some quinacridone magenta. And then I'm just going to use my little filbert brush here, and just around, I'm just going to draw a little circle around that right there. I got a little white on it, that's okay, we're not going for perfection here. And then maybe we'll also just do a little circle around that guy right in there, and then we can put in a little bit of white into the center there. And then this flower over here, maybe we want to kind of make it look like it's sort of hanging out that sort of direction. We can do that by elongating the edges there. There we go. And see how suddenly now it doesn't look like it's facing this way as much as sort of hanging out the side. We can just get a little touch of white and just sort of highlight that. And then I think I'm going to do the same thing to this guy over here. There we go. And that does it. We have this big, bold, fabulous bouquet in jewel tones, and it's just making me happy. I hope it makes you happy too. And I hope you had fun painting it. Thanks so much for watching, and happy painting.